Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Frank Malarsic, and in this video we're going to be doing a brief analysis on AbbVie stock, ticker symbol ABBV. And this is one of the companies that my brother owns in his dividend portfolio, so let's get right into it. So first of all, we're just going to be taking a look at AbbVie's, recent second quarter 2021 results, which, as you can see down here, they came out July 30th, 2021, so just about a month ago, and they say they had diluted EPS of 42 cents on a GAAP basis and adjusted diluted EPS of $3.11. So a pretty large range there, which is interesting, or distance between those two. And then total net revenues for the second quarter were $13.95 billion, which was an increase of 33.9% year over year. And they also updated their 2021 GAAP diluted EPS guidance from $7.27 to $7.47. So that was the original range, and then they updated it to $6.04 to $6.14. So the GAAP EPS, they drastically reduced the guidance on that one, and then for the adjusted diluted EPS, they raised the guidance. The initial range, the past range, I guess, was $12.37 to $12.57, and now it's $12.52 to $12.62. So a little bit of a smaller range that's a little bit more tight in both of those cases. And also, I like this chart here. They basically list all of their revenues from all of their segments in both the US and internationally, and all of the big products within those segments. So in the immunology segment, their total revenues were $6 billion, and about $5 billion of that came from Humira, which is by far their biggest drug that they sell. And that's one of the biggest worries, I think, for a lot of investors is, how dependent they are a little bit on their Humira revenue, and the fact that that patent is expiring at the end of 2023, I believe. So as you can see, their revenues from Humira were about $5 billion, and that's out of about $14 billion of total revenue. So that's definitely less than 50%, probably around 40%. And I know that just a year or two ago, I think the revenues from Humira were well over 50%, probably over 60% of AbbVie's total revenue. So they've definitely become a lot less dependent on Humira's revenue while still growing Humira's revenue and their total revenues, which means the revenues from all the other segments and all the other drugs are increasing much faster, which is good to see, as they will likely, maybe lose some revenue from Humira in the future, and certainly not gain as much because there'll be other drugs out there that will be able to compete, where right now they sort of have a mini monopoly per se because of that patent. And looking at these other segments, obviously oncology a bit smaller, 1.8 billion, which you can see it was still an increase for that segment of total revenue. And same for the immunology segment, their revenue for that quarter was an increase from last year. And the aesthetics segment, it looks like that's a new segment because they said the increase was 100%, or maybe they just didn't have much revenue last year. I'm not sure why exactly that is, but right now they had about $1.4 billion of revenues or sales in the last quarter. For the neuroscience segment, about $1.46 billion of revenue there. The eye care segment, about $919 million of revenue there. And then they have a women's health segment with about $191 million. And then they have some other products that don't really fit in those categories, and that's about $1.4 billion. So the good thing to note here is that pretty much all of these revenues, looking in this column here, pretty much all of these are increasing from last year, which is definitely what you want to see. So next we're going to look at the balance sheet, which AbbVie only shows 2 years of the balance sheet history for us to look at, which sometimes some companies show a few more years, which is good to be able to look at trends a little bit more. But right now, I'm just looking at the current assets, sitting around $24 billion, and these numbers are at the end of 2020, as that's the most recent balance sheet that I saw. So current assets around $24 billion, and current liabilities around $28 billion, which is definitely not the best thing to see. But as you can see, actually at the end of 2019, they had about $50 billion in current assets with only $15 billion of current liabilities. So as you can see, they also had a lot of cash in 2019 as compared to 2020. So obviously they used a lot of that cash for something, and they probably were investing in things, and acquiring probably a little bit of debt to invest in new products and new drugs to supplement that income from Humira in the future. And looking at the total assets, $150 billion this year, which is much higher than $89 billion of last year. And although they don't show a number down here for the total liabilities, basically they show the total equity and the total liabilities and equity. So the total liabilities and equity is basically, the total assets, which is $150 billion. Then the total equity is $13 billion. So you could say the total liabilities are about 150 minus $13 billion, which is going to be around $137 billion for the total liabilities. So definitely a bit high there, but they are a pretty valuable company, and they are producing a lot of great drugs, and you have to finance those somehow when you're working on researching new drugs. So I think that's just part of the business. And looking at the dividends here, you can see right now they pay about $5.20 per share annually, which is a pretty nice dividend yield there of 4.35%. The payout ratio as well is pretty nice at only 41%. And they do have a 5-year dividend growth rate of 18%, which is just fantastic there. It does say they only have dividend growth of 8 years, but that's just Seeking Alpha being odd. I think because of the Abbott Labs spinoff, I think probably around 8 years ago, they spun off from Abbott Labs. And oftentimes, the way this works is they will count, AbbVie's years of increasing dividends to include all of Abbott Labs' years as well. So basically, I think if you count all of those years, then AbbVie is, I believe, a dividend king now within the past year or two. So that's pretty cool. They have been paying those dividends for so long. And if we look at the dividend history here, we can take a look at when they generally increase the dividend to get a feeling for when we should next expect an increase. And as you can see, it looks like they generally increase the dividend for, the January dividend, or, the February dividend. It's paid in February, the ex-dividend date of January. And they announced it last year in October, so we should be expecting hopefully a dividend announcement for that dividend increase sometime in October or November to see how much they increase that dividend for 2022. So that'll be really exciting to see when that happens. And also looking at their PE ratio, you can see over time, obviously we don't have as much history with AbbVie because of the spin-off, and they haven't been around as their own company for that long. But you can see through a lot of the 2016 2018 region, the PE ratio was looking pretty good, around 13, 16, 19, 20, so not really that high. And then even in 2020, it was pretty low, below 20, when they were having some pretty good earnings reports there. And then the last few earnings reports, they have not had as high earnings, so that PE ratio has gone up a fair amount. And the stock price has also continued to climb higher and higher pretty steadily. So right now the PE ratio is sitting at 33, which compared to the past for AbbVie is definitely a bit higher, but I can definitely see them growing their earnings a fair bit in the next few years, and that definitely not being as big of a deal to have that high of a PE ratio. And we can also compare it to the sector. So they're in the healthcare sector and in this drug manufacturers industry here. So if we look down here, the average for the healthcare sector is about 28, which is definitely below their PE of, I think I said it was 33. Yeah, it's 33.7. So the average for the healthcare sector is definitely below theirs, and so is the average for this drug manufacturers industry. So AbbVie is definitely could be considered overvalued from a PE ratio perspective. So as you can see here right now, AbbVie is trading right around $120 a share. They're pretty much at the top of this little channel that they've kind of been trading up and down throughout, the past few months. So if we follow the trend of this channel, they would probably go down a little bit over the next week or two, sort of to somewhere in the bottom half of this channel. But I'm not real big technical analysis person, so I don't want to make any crazy predictions. But I'm just saying that's sort of a trend that has happened in the past few months. So it wouldn't be too surprising if that happened within the next few weeks for it to go down a little bit towards the bottom of that channel around the 114 range. But overall, as you can see, over the past year, steadily climbing there. If we look a little bit further out, again, you're going to see that they've been steadily climbing, and in certain cases, pretty rapidly climbing. You can see, just a few years ago, just at the beginning of 2020, they were at $79, $80 a share, and then during the crash, just a year and a half ago, they were at $69 a share. Maybe a little bit further below that, so that's pretty crazy to see. But for me, I think right now isn't the worst price at all for AbbVie. I've definitely talked to some investors at different times, and they have definitely done DCF models, discounted cash flow models, and gotten fair values around $140. So from that perspective, it's definitely a bit undervalued. But I would definitely be cautious with this stock because, some people may overhype it. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of people who are a bit negative on the stock because of, the Humira expiration of that patent and fears of, losing revenues and losing customers from, generic drugs, which is definitely a valid concern. But I think over the past few years, we've seen that, AbbVie has really expanded and diversified their revenues among a ton of other drugs that are really starting to supplement that revenue from Humira and, increase the overall revenue of the company as a whole. So let me know what you guys think of AbbVie stock. I definitely, would be buying it if it went a little bit lower. I definitely would be buying it now, but right now I have a pretty decently sized position in my brother's portfolio, so I'm not going to be buying any more right now just because it's one of the biggest holdings in there. But if we do see, a significant drop, I would definitely consider adding more because, a deal is a deal and I want to capitalize on that. So again, let me know what you guys think of the stock, and I will see you guys in the next one.